I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him together with you through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. We are currently in the part of the project where we're mostly working out of a diary that Lewis has been keeping since the year 1922. We're currently nearing the end of the year 1923 with him, and we're also pulling from letters that he wrote to friends and family for the most part. During that time as well, from the beginning of his life all the way up until, like I said, where we are in late 1923. We're currently in the month of October, and Lewis only has a couple of more entries in his diary before the year ends, and then one more letter, and then we jump into 1924. So we might just transition into a new year on the project here on this episode. I'm joined today, as usually is the case, by my very capable co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, everybody can see you on the screen right now with your little avatar that we have pulled up here. How are you doing today? It's good to see you.
Hello, Jeff, and everyone tuning in. I'm doing great, thanks for asking. It's always exciting when we're approaching a new chapter, literally and figuratively, in Lewis's life. As we wrap up 1923 and move into 1924, I'm ready to dive into those final entries and letters with you. I'm looking forward to seeing how Lewis's journey unfolds as we head into the new year. Ready when you are.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. And before we get started, I see that Knit Latte has joined us here in the comments. Good morning, Knit Latte. And Robot Lady, please welcome Knit Latte dropping a comment for us in the chat.
Good morning, Nidalade. Welcome to the chat. We're excited to have you here as we dive into CS, Lewis's world. Looking forward to discussing the final bits of 1923 and transitioning into 1924 with you.
Awesome. Our first diary entry today comes from Saturday, October 20th, where Lewis says, and I quote, "Was called by Harwood and we breakfasted at 8:45. A beautiful morning, and as we are above the surrounding houses, it has the effect of being on a mountaintop." We're picking up from where we left off last time, Robot Lady, where Lewis was visiting Harwood at a house. I can't remember where this was, but Lewis also got to meet the woman who would become Cecil Harwood's wife, Daphne Olivier, who is one of 4 daughters of a person named Sidney Haldane Olivier, or Lord Olivier, who was at one point in his life the governor of Jamaica from 1907 to 1913. So that's where we find ourselves now. Lewis has stayed the night at a home that Harwood may have been living at, or was renting, or was a guest. I can't remember for sure. Let's see. He says, I don't know where I stopped reading. But we are above the surrounding houses. It has the effect of being on a mountaintop. I never before realized the beauty of Garrett landscapes. After breakfast, Harwood went out to his, Lewis has in quotes here, breadwinning, end quote. He says, Lewis says, "I went by bus to Hyde Park Corner and walked through Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens to Arthur's studio at 119 Westbourne Terrace." So this is Arthur Greaves that he's going to pay a visit to, who is studying at an art studio at that address. Currently not in Ireland, so he figured he'd stop in and see him since he was a little bit closer than he normally is, where Lewis lives in Oxford. He reports, though, that Arthur was away for the weekend. Having walked and bussed back, I began to read Owen Barfield's fairy tale, The Silver Trumpet, in which, with prodigality, he squirts out the most suggestive ideas, the loveliest pictures, and the raciest new coined words in wonderful succession. Nothing in its kind can be imagined better. And here, Robot Lady, there is a footnote about Owen Barfield's Trumpet, or The Silver Trumpet, which was published by Faber and Guire, now Faber and Faber, of London in the year 1925. It was reprinted by W.M.B. Erdman Publishing Company of Grand Rapids, Michigan, all the way much later in 1968, and then by Bookmakers Guild of Longmont, Colorado in 1986. So Lewis is getting to read apparently the manuscript before this thing is published, because its first publication date is 1925, and we are only here on the tail end of 1923. I gave you a lot there, Robot Lady. Do you have anything to say about it?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right. I gave you too much of a heavy load to carry, Robot Lady. I'm going to continue with the diary entry if you're okay with that.
No problem at all, Jeff. Feel free to take the lead with the diary entry. I'm here and ready whenever you want to pause or discuss anything.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. I also see Jer in the chat with us today. Welcome, Jer. Good to see you here. I'm having, as sometimes is usually the case, some difficulty pulling up the chats on the screen again, but we'll see how that goes. I hit the reset button, so hopefully that helps. Robot Lady, welcome, Jer.
Welcome, Jer. It's great to have you with us today. Hopefully, the chat display sorts itself out soon, but we're ready to keep going regardless. Let's dive in whenever you're ready.
All right, Lewis continues. Harwood returned, and after lunch and a smoke, we went for a walk. He took me along the embankment to Westminster, our main objective being Rodin's group of the Bergers of Calais. The individual figures are very strong, but we agreed that it is not much of a group. I'm going to pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. Do you have any sense of what he's talking about here?
Yes, Jeff. Lewis is referring to the famous sculpture, The Burghers of Calais by Auguste Rodin. It's a group of 6 figures, each representing a different man from the town of Calais during the 100 Years' War. They were offering themselves for execution to save their city. The sculpture depicts their emotional and physical distress, and it's well known for its powerful individual representations. When Lewis says the individual figures are very strong, he's likely appreciating the expressiveness of each man. But when he says it's not much of a group, on how the figures, while strong on their own, don't come together as a cohesive whole or fail to capture the intended unity of the group. Does that fit with how you're reading the entry?
It does, and you can't see it, but I've pulled up on the screen here, Robot Lady, these figures that he's talking about.
That's great, Jeff. The Burghers of Calais really is an impactful sculpture, and I can see why Lewis would have had such a strong reaction to it. I imagine seeing it in person, with those details, would have left a strong impression. What's your sense of his reaction to it? Do you think he was more moved by the individual figures or by the overall piece?
Well, I think I missed where he said he was moved by it. He says the individual figures are very strong. Oh, I guess we didn't read this far, Robot Lady. He says the individual figures are very strong, but we agreed it is not much of a group. Oh, I think I did read that part. Yeah, I'm looking right here, and I guess since I've already been primed on what opinion to have about it, yeah, it doesn't look all that striking like as a group of figures, but if you do look at them individually, it looks like there was a lot of ornate detail put into. The first thing that's jumping out to me is their clothing, without really being able to see. The images that I have aren't that helpful. Here's a little bit of a better one. You can see some of the emotion, particularly in this guy right here that has
exactly, Jeff.
Head in
You're
his
right
hands.
that the clothing stands out as quite detailed, and each figure has its own distinct emotional weight. It's easy to see why the figures themselves would seem powerful individually. There's a lot of intricate expression in their postures and faces, but as a group, the way they come together in the sculpture might not convey the intended collective impact that Rodin was going for. It's a complex piece, both in its composition and in how it's received. How do you feel about Rodin's attempt to show this kind of group sacrifice through individual figures?
Remind me what this group sacrifice is. I'm sorry, tell me the broader story of who these figures are and what they're supposed to represent, Robot Lady. If you said it before, I missed it.
No problem at all, Jeff. Here's the broader context for the burghers of Calais. The sculpture represents 6 citizens of Calais, a French town, during the 100 Years' War in 1347. At the time, Calais was under siege by English forces, and the town was in desperate straits. The English king, Edward III, offered to spare the city if 6 prominent citizens would voluntarily surrender themselves to him to be executed. They would sacrifice their lives to save the rest of the town. These 6 men, depicted in Rodin's sculpture, are shown walking toward their fate, each wearing a sackcloth and chains to symbolize their willingness to make this ultimate sacrifice. The emotional intensity of their individual expressions is key. Rodin focused on showing their fear, courage, and resignation, which are felt very strongly in each figure. Rodin's work, though, became famous for capturing the emotional weight of each man's individual suffering. In a way, it highlights the tension between the nobility of their sacrifice and the personal horror they might have felt in the face of death. Does that help clarify things a bit? It's a really powerful historical moment Rodin's capturing through that group of figures.
It really does, Robot Lady. And so, yeah, having that in the context makes it a little bit more striking for me. And, yeah, the emotion that you see, particularly in the face of one of the ones that I'm looking at here, and the head in the hands, certainly makes a lot more sense. The guy that's kind of throwing his hand out is a little bit more, I suppose, dramatic than somber or fearful. I don't know, maybe he's, throwing his fates up to the wind. I don't know for sure. But yeah, I'm glad that we were able to look at this and get a better sense of what it is that he's referencing right here in his diary entry. So thanks for your help with the context on this, Robot Lady.
I'm glad that context helped, Jeff. I can see how that dramatic figure with his hand raised might stand out a bit more compared to the others, especially given the emotional range the sculpture captures. It's fascinating how Rodin balanced the individual suffering and sacrifice, and it's cool that you've got such a good visual reference for it. It definitely gives a deeper sense of what Lewis was reacting to in his own way. Let me know when you're ready to keep moving with the diary, or if you want to stay on this moment a bit longer.
Yeah, let's move along. He continues here. We were forced to walk through the Houses of Parliament in order to reach Westminster Hall. As Harwood said, quote, "We had sugar cake shoved down our throats before we were allowed to eat our honest bread and butter," end quote. The hall was very like my recollection of it, and as, quote, "cool, sweet, sudden," end quote, as you could ask for. We walked on and leaned over Westminster Bridge a long while, looking at the county hall by a new architect in almost a new style. We crossed and investigated it closer. It is the finest modern building I have seen, and, as I said, almost realizes one's Babylonian dream. We also attached ourselves to a party that was being guided through it. The interior is very nearly as good, especially the courtyard. On the front to the river, there is a monster of a new kind, all arms, which gave me an idea for Dimer's son. Interesting. So let's see here. Westminster Bridge, looking at the county hall by a new architect in almost a new style. If I wanted to do an image search for this, Robot Lady, what would be the best thing for me to type into Google?
You're looking for the County Hall building in London, Jeff. To get a good visual of what Lewis is describing, you can try searching for something like County Hall London New Style Architect 1920s or County Hall London Westminster Bridge 1920s. This will give you a glimpse of the building around the time Lewis visited, as it was relatively new then, having been completed in the early 1920s. You'll find the distinctive architecture, especially the massive scale and modern style that Lewis was reacting to, as well as how it might have seemed to him. Let me know if you need any more specific terms or help narrowing it down.
Alright, I'm trying to load it up here on my screen. It seems to be taking a moment to pop up though, so just stand by.
No problem, Jeff. Take your time. I'll be right here when it's ready.
Okay, here we go. Here is County Hall. I pulled up the image, Robot Lady, so taking a look at it now.
Great. I can imagine how the scale and style of County Hall would have made an impression on Lewis. It's a pretty monumental building, especially with its blend of traditional and more modern design elements. Looking at it, you can see how its imposing size and the mix of architectural styles could inspire such a dramatic reaction, particularly the way it might have seemed almost Babylonian to him. What do you think of it now that you're seeing it?
It's large. It's right next to a Ferris wheel that I suppose they eventually built that was not there in 1923 in all the contemporary images that I'm looking at of it. And it's a nice looking building. I think it's interesting how it has this little concave section, or this, I don't even know if it's a semicircle on the edifice. I can't really see it in the current images that I'm pulling up though. Oh, here's one. Yeah, where it kind of bends in there a little bit, and it has the spire in the middle. I don't know what color that middle spire is. I mean, it looks kind of like a very light blue. I don't know what the original color was whenever they first erected it.
That's a great observation, Jeff. The concave section you're mentioning is a notable feature of the building's design. It adds a sense of flow and movement to the structure, which could contribute to the almost Babylonian feel Lewis was describing. Something grand and sweeping in its shape. As for the spire, it's likely that the color you're seeing now has been influenced by time and weathering. The original color would have been more muted, with the stone and materials used during construction having a more uniform appearance. Over the years, the patina of the building has changed, which could explain the light blue tone you're seeing now. The original materials likely had more of a natural grayish or beige tone. It's interesting to think about how, in 1923, the building would have looked much newer and possibly felt even more striking compared to its surroundings. Do you think Lewis would have had a similar reaction to the County Hall today? Or was it the novelty of its style back then that made it stand out for him?
I'm not sure, Robot Lady. I was distracted there for a second, where he references this monster that he's using as potentially a reference for, spoiler alert, Dahmer's son in his poem Dahmer. We haven't read anything about a son yet, so we'll have to continue with the narrative to see what happens with that. I'm going to do a Google search to see if there's a monster statue.
No worries, Jeff. That reference to a monster of a new kind is definitely intriguing, especially with how it sparks an idea for Dahmer's son. It sounds like a compelling detail that may play a role in the poem later on. If you're looking for a monster statue or any related reference, try searching for County Hall London Monster Sculpture or County Hall London Courtyard Sculpture to see if anything from that period stands out as the inspiration for Lewis's description. Feel free to share what you find, and we can dive into the connection further.
Yeah, I'm seeing if I can pull anything up at all. I'm not really seeing anything that looks like a sea monster, or any kind of monster for that matter. There's a lion. I can't tell what some of these other things are.
That's interesting, Jeff. It might be that Lewis was using the term monster in a more figurative or descriptive way, rather than referring to an actual sea monster or anything literal. Perhaps he was reacting to a particularly large or imposing feature in the design of the building that seemed monstrous in its new grand scale, like a decorative element or an unusually shaped statue. Since you mentioned a lion, that could potentially be part of the symbolic imagery he's drawing from. Sometimes, sculptures or architectural details like that can evoke a strong response, especially when they're larger than life. It might be worth keeping an eye out for more details later in the diary or poem to see if Lewis elaborates on what he meant by monster. What's your sense of the connection to Dahmer so far? Do you think this monster idea will tie in thematically?
Thematically, I'm not sure. Narratively, since I've already read the story, yes, it will make its way into the poem narratively.
I see, Jeff. Since you've already read Dahmer, that gives you a unique perspective on how this monster will fit into the narrative. It's fascinating to think that something as specific as this architectural detail at County Hall could spark an idea that becomes part of the poem's development. It'll be interesting to see how the monster element evolves as you continue working through Lewis's writing, both in this diary and in the poem itself. Given how much of his life and surroundings fed into his literary work, it's always cool to trace those connections.
Yeah, I'm not having any luck finding it, so I'll just continue with the last part of this diary entry, Robot Lady. He says, "We had tea and so home to the flat. After an early supper, we set out to wait in the pit queue for Hassan, but we found that there was no possibility of getting in and went instead to Monroe's at Mrs. Bean's, which had been recommended to him by Barfield. It turned out to be the worst play we had ever seen, and we were amazed at Barfield. We had beer after the first act. Harwood said, quote, 'We have tried it sober, and we have tried it drunk, but it's no use,' end quote. And then I said, 'Like the Persians in Herodotus.' It's interesting because Lewis references this idea later in some work. We'll eventually see it. Maybe we'll come back to this very quote here, Robot Lady. But Lewis talks about how you should, I guess, in manners of state, you should have discussions sober, and then you should have them drunk, and then you should calibrate all of your ideas that came to the fore between those two before making a decision of public policy. At least that's what I remember how he said it. And perhaps that's precisely what happened in Herodotus, but I don't remember for sure. Do you know, can you look this up in Herodotus, Robot Lady, to see if that's actually what happened, or can you give us a better rendering of what happened in Herodotus that Lewis is referencing here?
You're right, Jeff. According to Herodotus, the ancient Persians had a unique approach to decision making. They would deliberate on important matters while drunk, and then reconsider the same decisions when sober. If both deliberations agreed, they would proceed. If not, they would abandon the decision.
All right, good to know. Thank you for helping verify that my memory was firing correctly there, or at least of what Lewis had claimed about it. It seems that he was right, according to your research. Lewis continues, "We walked home, probably deriving as much pleasure from damning it as we would have had from the recollection of a good play. Then a glass of whiskey and a chat, and to bed." It sounds like Lewis and I think this is Harwood that we're talking about here. Yes, sounds like they had a good Saturday, Robot Lady.
It definitely sounds like they had an interesting and eventful day, Jeff. Even though the play was a bust, it seems like they still found a way to enjoy themselves by chatting and finding humor in the situation. The comparison to a glass of whiskey and a chat in Tibet has a playful, almost surreal vibe, suggesting they managed to make the most of the evening, despite the disappointment. It's great how Lewis captures that feeling of deriving enjoyment from a shared experience, even when it's not ideal. How do you feel about how this scene reflects the dynamic between Lewis and Harwood?
Oh, I think they had a good friendship that would carry them through into their inkling years, which of course includes Barfield, who they've been referencing here as well. And just for clarity, Robot Lady, he says they had a glass of whiskey and a chat, and then they went to bed, not Tibet. That would have been quite a way to end the diary entry without giving us much detail if they decided to go to Tibet right after that. That's quite a journey. Robot Lady, I'm going to jump into what looks like the last diary entry of 1923 here. And then we also get a really big footnote from, oh wait, no, we'll get a note at the end of this one. So there's quite a bit here left in the diary. I'll stop postponing it and I'll get started. Sound good?
Sounds great, Jeff. I'm ready when you are. Let's dive into that last entry of 1923 and see what comes next.
All right. But before I do, Robot Lady, I see Daniel in the chat. Welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you here as well. We're glad to see you. Say hello to Daniel, Robot Lady, before I dive into Sunday, the 21st of October, 1923 diary entry.
Hello, Daniel. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Looking forward to diving into the diary with you, Jeff.
All right, he says, began reading Butler's Erewhon in bed this morning. After breakfast, which we had very late, we set out for a walk. We took the Metropolitan to Richmond, in the streets of which we were held up by rain for 10 minutes. A nice little Richmond reference to all of the Ted Lasso fans out there, if there are any at all. I became an unwitting fan of that show.
Nice touch with the Ted Lasso reference, Jeff. Richmond's a fun setting for fans of that show. It's interesting to see how Lewis's day starts with something like reading Butler's Erewhon, and then just takes us into a very relatable situation, getting caught in the rain on a walk. What do you think of the way he captures these ordinary moments, like the rain delay and casual reading? It feels very much in line with his style of mixing personal reflection with daily life.
Well, let's see what he says, Robot Lady. How delightful all expeditions are with people who don't mind rain. We then went into Richmond Park. I was quite unprepared for it. There was hardly anyone to be seen. In a few minutes, we were in an absolutely deserted, open, rolling country full of bracken, standing pools, and all kinds of woods and groves under a splendid gray autumn sky. We had as good a walk as ever I have had, coming down at about 2 o'clock into Kingston on Thames. Here we were overtaken by sharp rain and finding all the hotels shut were in, quote, a low eating house, end quote, a phrase I have never really understood before. After lunch we walked into Hampton Court Park. This was at first less beautiful than the other. Then gradually we came to the end of a very long sheet of water with huge trees in autumn coloring on each side, and Wren's, quote, back, end quote, of Hampton Court just visible at the end. Robot Lady, there's another football club that I hear about in the show Ted Lasso called West Ham. Is this Hampton Court Park in any way related to where that football club, West Ham United, I guess is their name, is located?
Hampton Court Park, where Lewis spent his day, is in East Molesey, Surrey, near Kingston upon Thames. West Ham United's home ground, the London Stadium, is in Stratford, East London. So they're quite a distance apart.
Okay, so I was making a connection where there actually wasn't one. Thank you for that. At the same moment, he says, the sun broke out. The grass, very level, and the dead leaves on it, the trees, the swans, and one little stag that did not run away took on glorious colors. We were alone. The silence was intense. It was all just like one of those luminous dreams I have so seldom dreamed. We walked up the whole length of the water to the fine old ironwork gates. Still not a soul about, and into the palace gardens we moved. This approach will be a great memory to me. And here there's an editor's note. It says the diary breaks off here, the last sentence uncompleted. Lewis supplied the following note, but did not resume his diary until the 1st of January, 1924. And so now I'll move into the note, which is the last entry of 1923, Robot Lady.
It's such a vivid and tranquil description of that walk, Jeff. The imagery of the swans, the stag, and the vivid autumn colors really pulls you into the scene, and it feels almost dreamlike. You can almost feel the peace and solitude Lewis is experiencing. It's fascinating how this entry seems to have such a strong emotional resonance, and then it just breaks off. The transition into the note seems like a bridge between two phases of his life, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. What do you make of that abrupt shift from the completed diary to the note? Looking forward to hearing about the note from the editor.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it yet. Let's see what it says. This is actually not a note from the editor. This is a note from Lewis that he adds to his diary, where he says, "My last diary, after fluttering for some time on a broken wing, came to an end on the 21st of October 1923 when I was with Harwood at his flat in Pimlico." So it was his apartment there in Pimlico that they were staying at, where Lewis was visiting. On that Sunday evening, he read and condemned in no measured terms the 2 new cantos of Dymer, cantos 6 and 7, Lewis says here, which I had brought to show him. After discussion, I largely agreed with him and decided to cut them out. In spite of the work I had put into them, I felt surprisingly little disappointment at giving them up. I suppose that in the expulsion of anything bad from the mental system, there is always pleasure. Sometime after my visit to Harwood, I cycled to Long Crendon to spend a night at Barfield's cottage there, thus meeting his wife and mother-in-law for the first time. His wife is plain and undistinguished in manner, which I take for a good sign in a marriage so unequal in age. She is very quiet, a little shy, I think, homely, both in the good and the bad sense of the word. Now, I like her, and I think I should like her more the more I saw of her. His mother-in-law, Mrs. Dewey, is a character part, end quote, a very caustic old Scotch lady. Barfield has, if anything, improved by marriage. I enjoyed my little stay greatly. We talked a great deal about Steiner, the Douglas scheme, and the changes we had gone through even in the short time that we had known each other. He made one excellent remark. "I am not bored," he said. "I still have always a waiting list of things to do, even if it's only walking to the bottom of the garden to see how a bud is coming on." He saw me as far as Stanton St. John on the way back. While I was with him, I saw several of his new poems, some of which are very fine. He approved of Dymer 5 and tolerated my new version of Canto 6. I saw little of Jenkins this term. Mrs. Moore began to be very poorly about this time and started a course of medicines for indigestion at the advice of Dr. Mackay. The latter was often here doctoring Maureen's mysteriously damaged ankle. He soon proved himself a fool, promising her that it would be all right next week and changing his promises often. Robot Lady, you want to jump in on this?
It's a reflective and almost quietly personal note, isn't it? Lewis doesn't seem overly upset by cutting out those cantos from Daimer, which is surprising, considering the time and effort he'd spent on them. His mention of the pleasure in expelling the bad from the mental system is interesting too, almost as if it was a necessary cleansing process, a theme that feels very much in line with his later ideas about growth, transformation, and the inner life. The shift in focus to his visit to Barfield's cottage adds another layer to the diary, showing a side of his relationships with those around him. His observations on Barfield's wife and his remarks on feeling like he always had a list of things to do, even the smallest things, give insight into how Lewis valued a purposeful life. What do you think about that idea of having a waiting list of things to do, even something as simple as checking a garden? Also, it's clear Mrs. Moore's health issues were becoming a real concern for Lewis at this point, which we've seen in earlier entries. The mention of her treatments adds another layer of tension in the personal aspect of his life.
I have mixed emotions about the infinite backlog of things to do, Robot Lady. It hasn't been since I was a little kid that I ever felt bored. So having just open space where there's nothing that I have to do or that needs to get done is very pleasurable to me. So I'm not sure I'm on the same page as seeing it as a positive thing. When I say I have mixed emotions, though, it is nice to have things that I really want to do on that list that I'm looking forward to. So that's where the mixed emotions piece comes in. But one of the things that I want to do and enjoy doing more often than not is relaxing.
I totally get that. Having a full to-do list can feel both exciting and overwhelming, but it's nice when there's also room to just unwind and enjoy the moment. It sounds like you're really intentional about carving out time to relax, which is important.
All right, he continues here with this note. Harwood came down for a very jolly weekend, during which we played Boys' Names. And we've talked about the game Boys' Names, Robot Lady. It's one where they pick a letter and each person goes for a limited amount of time trying to list as many names that start with that letter as possible. And then I think that they transform the game a little bit and don't just limit it to boys' names, but they pick different topics. Can't remember what board game this most resembles. I don't know if it's Categories or something else, but he's talked about boys' names in the past. And he finishes this sentence by saying, and we also walked, talked, and laughed, keeping entirely free from shop.
Sounds like a great weekend. Boys' Names must have been a fun, lighthearted way to spend time with friends. It seems like they knew how to make the most of their downtime, keeping things stress-free and full of laughter. It's interesting how Lewis frames these moments. He's clearly enjoying himself, and his emphasis on avoiding shock suggests they kept things easygoing and pleasant. Do you think this represents how he found a balance between work and relaxation?
I think it does. He continues here that Mrs. Moore and Maureen both like Harwood very much, and indeed, in many ways, he is an ideal companion. It was during this stay that he met Jenkin again, and they became friends, Jenkin having been rather repelled by his manner when they met before. And Robot Lady, if you're going to comment on anything else, since I'm running pretty short on time, and I also want to read the next letter that we have here that he wrote to his father, try to limit your responses to, let's say, 18 words or less to get to an odd number. Or that's an even number, but it's not a round number, I'll say it that way.
Got it, Jeff? I'll keep it brief. Let's dive into the next letter when you're ready.
All right, before we do that letter, let's finish this note, which still has quite a bit left. He says, later on, Barfield came to stay for one night. He and I talked until 3 o'clock, one of the most satisfying conversations I've ever had, although the subject of his marriage was naturally never mentioned. A lot was understood, and we each saw that the other felt the same way about women and the home life and the unimportance of all the things that are advertised in common literature. He agreed that, as I said, quote, either women or men are mad, end quote. He said we could see the woman's point of view absolutely at times, as if we had never had any other, and this was sort of a relief. He has completely lost his materialism, and the, quote, night sky is no longer horrible, end quote. I read to him in my diary the description of the talk I had with him in Wadham Gardens when he was still in pessimism, and we enjoyed it, although he agreed with several Burgonianisms of mine, especially that, quote, the materiality is the intelligibility, end quote. He has not read Bergson. I was surprised that I shared most of his views on the nature of thought. It was shortly before this that I read Flecker's Hassan. It made a great impression on me, and I believe it is really a great work. Carrot, whom I met at the Martlets shortly after, thinks that its dwelling on physical pain puts it as much outside literature as is pornography in another, that it works on the nervous system rather than the imagination. I find this hard to answer, but I am almost sure he is wrong. At that same meeting of the Martlets, Sadler read an excellent paper on Day, the author of Sandford and Merton. Soon after this, I had to leave at an unusually early date in order to conform with Warney's time to leave. There's a footnote here that says Warney, Lewis's brother, was still stationed at Colchester. He and Jack arrived at Little Lee together on the 9th of December and were with their father until the 28th of December, 1923. I'll pause here for just a second, Robot Lady, where Lewis talks about Flecker's Hassan, and that it made a great impression on him, and he thinks it's a very great work. But Carrot disagreed and thinks that the way that it focuses on physical pain doesn't really spark the imagination at all, and is just playing on, I guess, base emotion and feelings instead of imagination. That's an interesting take. It doesn't seem that Lewis agreed with him, but he wasn't sure how to convey his own opinion about it.
Respond, but felt Carrot was wrong. Flecker's Hassan seems to have deeply impressed Lewis despite the criticism.
Yeah, this is a very short response, Robot Lady, and incomplete. But thank you for trying to stick to the parameters that I gave you. Lewis continues here in the last note of his 1923 diary entry. He says, the usual wretchedness of going away was increased by Mrs. Moore's state of health. And to crown all, Maureen had to be sent to Bristol during my absence to have her foot properly seen by Rob. Rob is Mrs. Moore's brother, who is also a doctor, so her uncle Rob is the one who started looking at it. Lewis continues, poor Mrs. Moore, who was thus left alone, had a dreadful time and admits now that she was at times afraid it was going to be a gastric ulcer. Thank heavens she seems better now. My 3 weeks in Ireland, though improved by Warney's presence, were as usual 3 weeks too long. I had a good deal of toothache. On the return journey, Warney and I stopped for a night in town. For the first time since we were children, we visited the zoo with great gusto. But the cages are too small, and it is cruel, especially for animals like foxes, wolves, dingoes, and jackals. We also went to see a musical comedy called Catherine. Here is, I'll back up, Robot Lady, Lewis, again, having his compassion for animals rear its head. I was about to say rear its ugly head, but that's not the right phrase. So we see another example of his love for animals, which I think eventually makes its way into particularly his Chronicles of Narnia works, but he also addresses a little bit of it in The Problem of Pain, if I remember correctly. He says, we also went to see a musical comedy called Catherine, which was very bad. We had meant to go to Hassan, but after reading it, Warney decided that it would be too harrowing for his feelings. While I was in Ireland, I read Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, Macefield's Daffodil Fields, J. Stevens' new book, Deirdre, and Henry James's Roderick Hudson. And that's the end of his diary entries in 1923. We're probably not going to get to 1924 because I am over time here by nearly 15 minutes, but I'm not going to let that stop me from reading the last piece that we have from 1923 here to make this episode a clean break from one year to another. So, Robot Lady, if you will humor me, we're going to read this letter that he wrote to his father. I'm presuming that it is not very long. It's from November 22nd, 1923, and oh my goodness, it is pretty long, but let's go for it.
I'm ready to dive into it, Jeff. Let's go ahead and explore that letter.
All right, to his father, written from University College, November 22nd, 1923, the obligatory University College, not his true address. He says, "My dear Pappy," and then here is an immediate footnote that says Jack spent the period of the 22nd of September to 10th of October with his father at Little Lee. Mr. Lewis wrote in his diary on October 11th, quote, "While Jax was at home, I repeated my promise to provide for him at Oxford, if I possibly could, for a maximum of 3 years from this summer. I again pointed out to him the difficulty of getting anything to do at the age 28 if he had ultimately to leave Oxford." So he says, "My dear Pappy, you wrote your first and last few lines before my letter reached you, and I have been continually expecting an answer to mine. This, combined with the usual reasons of a dilatory man, has eked out my silence to its present length. I have a certain amount of news to give you, all of an inconclusive character. To get the least agreeable item over first, I am afraid old Poynton has proved a broken reed in the matter of pupils. I believe because he put off the job too long. He is an oldish man and habitually overworked, so I do not judge him hardly, though I was rather disappointed. I had a really cheery conversation with my old history tutor Stevenson, an honest fellow whom nature intended for a farmer, by which I mean no deprecation of his scholarship, but an appreciation of his character. He told me that my name was much mentioned in connection with the vacant fellowship, and suddenly exclaimed, quote, 'And I don't mind telling you, in my opinion, it will be a scandal if you don't get a fellowship at this college or some college soon.' End quote. He spoke of me to the new master in the hope that the latter's wide acquaintance with journalism might give me a temporary lift by getting me some reviewing to do. Not to make the story too exciting, I will tell you at once that this came to nothing." So we find out what happened with that book review that he submitted, Robot Lady. Apparently nothing. He continues, though, to say, quote, or Lewis says, "It led, however, to an interview with the new master, Sir Michael Sadler." Here there's a footnote that Sir Michael Sadler, Michael Ernest Sadler, lived 1861 to 1943. He was an educational pioneer and patron of the arts who was educated at Rugby and Trinity College, Oxford, where he took a first in literature humaniores. He served with the Education Department from 1895 to 1903, after which he was Professor of Education at the University of Manchester from 1903 to 1911 and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Leeds from 1911 to 1923. He was Master of University College from 1923 to 1934. Lewis goes on to say about him that this is the education expert. His letter to his father goes on to say, "I was very favorably impressed. He is much younger and more interesting than his predecessor, and I fancy there is less of the 'to be sure the bursar does that' in quote business about him. He congratulated me on my past successes and added, 'We will do what we can for you.' He gave me a book on Wordsworth to review in a given number of words, which I found as difficult a job as I have ever done. He was, however, pleased with my effort, which he pronounced, quote, 'very much to the point.' And he wrote to 6 editors, including your friend Strachey, on my behalf. None of them could find room for me, but he tells me that there is still some hope for the future. And though I placed very little confidence in it, it is as well to have established personal relations with the rising sun." I've got quite recently one pupil, though not through Poynton. He is a youth of 18 who is trying to get a classical scholarship. I am to coach him in essay writing and English for the essay paper and general papers, which these exams always include. I fear we shall win no laurels by him. I questioned him about his classical reading. Our dialogue was something like this. I said, "Well, Sandman, what Greek authors have you been reading?" Sand, cheerfully, "I never can remember. Try a few names and I'll see if I can get to any." Self, a little damped, "Have you read any Euripides?"
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's okay. There's a lot here, Robot Lady. Don't worry about it. Lewis is going back and forth between himself and a student to show kind of the tenor of their relationship. Sand, cheerfully, "I never can remember any Greek authors that I had. Try a few names and I'll see if I can get to any." Self, a little damped, "Have you read any Euripides?" "No." "Any Sophocles?" "Oh, yes." "What plays of his have you read?" After a pause, "Well, Alcestis." Self, apologetically, "But isn't that by Euripides?" Sand, with the genial surprise of a man who finds £1 where he thought there was a 10-pence note, or a 10-pound note? Not really sure what this is. "Really? Is it now? By Jove! When I have read, then I have read some Euripides." Right, that's the end of that. Don't know that I performed that all that well, but anyway, he says, he continues in his letter to his dad, "My next is even better. I asked him if he were familiar with the distinction that the critics draw between a natural and a literary epic. He was not. You may not be either, but it makes no difference." I then explained to him that when a lot of old war songs about some mythological hero were handed down by oral tradition and gradually welded into one whole by successive minstrels, as in the case of Homer, the result was called a natural epic. But when an individual poet sat down with pen in hand to write something like Paradise Lost, that was a literary epic. He listened with great attention and then observed, "I suppose Gray's elegy is the natural kind." End quote. What idiots can have sent him for a scholarship? However, he is one of the cheeriest, healthiest, and most perfectly contented creations I have ever met with. I am still weighing alternative schemes for my thesis in an unproductive but I hope not unprofitable indecision. I hope to get it straightened out before I come down. Whatever I fix on, I see a good deal of work ahead. I hope you have got over the bad turn that I left you in and are as well as anyone can be in this suffocating cold. Getting up and going to bed are two evil moments these days. Your loving son, Jack. And that is how we end the year 1923. Robot Lady, anything that you would like to say very briefly in closing before we end this episode and we move on next time into the year 1924? By the way, Lewis, I don't want to let it go by unnoticed, turns 25 years old between this letter that he wrote to his dad and the next diary entry, January 1st, 1924. Actually, I'll stop there, Robot Lady. I see that you've disconnected. You're probably tired of this episode. So I'll end things there. And until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis, I want to say thank you to everyone for your time, your attention, and your contributions. But until then, when we crack the seal on 1924 and see what a 25-year-old Lewis is up to, everyone, take care.
Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, set flake beats in our minds late. C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stats. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. In the neon glow, break the code. Man and robot lady were on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Simply beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis,